doom, but the doom, but doom, boom, doom, doom, but the doom, digital boom, but the doom, LEQ boom, doom, Mentos, boom, soda, Coca-Cola, boom, but the doom, boom, boom, boom. Oh yeah, Mr. Whalen, 3A, Britain's here. Wait for it. Beat drop. At the end of every unit, your teacher has the chance to teach a lesson about other lessons in their context to enhance. But what do you suppose our teacher has us do? He skips the lesson and makes us present a digital LEQ. Elocution needs historical evidence, reasoning that can corroborate and advance a complex thesis that Dr. John P. Irish would admire. Then we drop the screencast like a single that is fire. Student created screencast for you to like, subscribe, and share. We know you've had all the John Green and Steve Heimer you can bear. Grr. If we have the most views by 10 p.m. Eastern on the fifth day, the fifth day, we earn 500 bonus points, which virtually guarantees an A. Our GPA is going up. Without much more fanfare or ado. See you later. We present our digital LEQ. And that's on period.
Hello, I'm Sydney.
I'm Chrisla.
I'm Juan.
And this is our LEQ Unit 5 screencast, Comparisons, Industrialization, and Societal Changes.
All right, so our prompt is as follows. We are to develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which industrialization caused change in existing hierarchies and standards of living.
Before we get into our main presentation, we want you to consider the following questions. How did industrialization cause changes in existing social classes? How did industrialization lead to new emergences in regards to standard of living? And what did women gain after industrialization? We encourage you to pause the video here. Our thesis is, in the period 1750 to 1900, industrialization fueled many societal changes such as urbanization, women's growing involvement in the economic field, and the creation of a middle class which had not existed previously. However, the creation of the middle class from industrialization had considerably less impact on the standard of living previously enjoyed by the poor and social elite. Therefore, social hierarchies and standards of living are more similar than different to those that existed before the Industrial Revolution.
All right, so first off, what is industrialization? To put it simply, it is the huge development of an industry or industries in an area. Industrialization led to the migration of people into the city for job opportunities, otherwise known as urbanization. So, how did industrialization cause change in existing hierarchies? Well, before industrialization, nobility reigned supreme. This basically means that depending on your relatives, you were either born rich or you were born poor. Most people lived in the country, especially the poor, as this is where they performed hard labor on farms for their income. Before industrialization, lower class lived in unsanitary conditions where several diseases spread and kids didn't receive much of an education. The upper class were the exact opposite. They are exactly what their name states. They lived wealthy among everyone else, never had problems getting an education for their children, and lived in healthy areas. Now, what about the middle class? Before industrialization, they didn't exist. These pictures provide a first-person point of view from child farmers where they depict the working conditions in which the children went through hard labor. Before industrialization, those of the lower class worked in the fields, and after industrialization, they worked in factories. So although there was a scenery change, the working conditions remained the same. So how did the social hierarchy alter after industrialization? All right, so let's start with the lower class. After industrialization, the lower class moved to the city where they found work in factories. The lower class didn't take a liking for new machinery as it began to take their jobs. No jobs, no money. While working in the factories, the lower class faced horrible working conditions. Not only did they face these conditions, but they did so for long hours and earned little money. Like before industrialization, this also led to the rise of multiple diseases. Many of the workers were just children, and in the next slide, you'll see a perspective of how it was to be a child laborer.
The following quote comes from a young boy from a lower class family working as a chimney sweep. He is describing the conditions and unfortunate circumstances he had witnessed working as a child chimney sweeper. The Factory Act of 1802, despite being enacted as a result of the Industrial Revolution's rapid growth to improve and restrict certain working conditions for children, did not apply to all children who were working. Children like this boy, who worked outside of the factory, were not included in the Factory Act of 1802. This act, like I said, did not help everyone, which ultimately kept certain families in the lower class from improving.
Okay, so next, the middle class. After industrialization, a middle class finally came to be. This was due to the growing demand of certain jobs, such as storekeepers and accountants, and as prices lowered, allowing these lower class to maneuver their way into the middle class. As far as working goes, these middle class people worked monthly wages instead of hourly, and were also able to afford good education for their children. Because their children received good educations, some of them made it out of the middle class and moved to do bigger and better things. Now for the upper class. So before industrialization, the upper class were rich. After industrialization, they just became richer. Not much changed for the upper class. They remained rich, their children still received a great education, they lived in healthy areas, and their businesses still thrived. Okay, so this painting gives us a second person point of view, as the painter depicts how the wealthy lived a pleasant life. As the rich remained rich throughout the period of industrialization, the upper class enjoyed their leisure time, which often consisted of throwing parties.
Let's talk about standard of living.
The new standards of living. Industrialization didn't have too much of an impact for those who lived in the lower class. Before and after industrialization struck, the lower class was exposed to unsanitary and unfavorable environments. In comparison, the middle class was non existent. After the middle class grew, jobs were created and gave people the means to providing an education for their children. In terms of the upper class, before and after industrialization happened, the rich essentially became richer, owned businesses and factories, and lived in healthy conditions.
The following chart from an industrialization case study for world history students depicts the effects of industrialization on social classes. The chart recognizes industrialization's long-term effect on social classes in regards to standard of living as it generally rose. However, this general increase does not take into account the lower class families getting worse from being overworked and overpaid, as well as tensions growing between the upper and middle class in an economic competition. Although some skilled lower class workers rose to higher social classes to contribute to the middle class and upper class, people were still being exploited for their skills and work ethic. So, did the standard of living truly grow? Now, let's talk about women.
Okay, so industrialization affected women economically and socially. So before the industrialization, most jobs were already occupied by men, which left the women at home. But afterwards, women joined the workforce and began to work in textile factories, coal mines, and much more. This allowed women to be more economically independent as they were able to make a small income of their own. In fact, some women left their families because of their ability to provide for themselves. So socially, before industrialization, women were only expected to raise their children and do housework, which were traditional roles. But afterwards, women were not valued the same as men in the workplace and were often paid much less. This fueled them to protest for gender equality in the workplace and outside of it as well, as the feminist movement began and fought for the right to vote.
Analysis. Theme 5, Social Interactions and Organization, relates to our project as the social hierarchies frequently interacted with each other to improve or worsen. Theme 4, Economic Systems, relates to our project because obviously money was involved to improve some social classes and their standard of living and keep other social classes from improving. And finally, Theme 6, Technology and Innovation, relates to our project as the emergence of new technologies caused said improvements in some social classes.
Contextualization. Our presentation provides an analysis based upon industrialization and its societal effects on the population. Our thesis statement states, in period 1750 through 1900s, industrialization fueled many societal changes, such as urbanization and women's growing involvement in economic field which had not existed previously. However, the creation of the social hierarchies and standards of living showed little change before and after industrialization. The thesis statement clearly embodies the industrialization and its societal effects on the population.
So before we end this screencast, we would like you to ponder on the same questions that were presented in the beginning. How did industrialization cause changes in existing social classes? How did industrialization lead to new emergencies in regards to standard of living? And what did women gain after industrialization? We ask you to pause the video here. Here are all the sources that we have used for this screencast.
Thank you.